Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we have with us Mark Rockwell, who's the author of 5 Mistakes Lawyers Make That Kill Their Career. Mark, welcome to the program.
Well, good morning, Mike. Thank you.
Hey, so I definitely want to get into 5 mistakes because if we know what those mistakes are, we can avoid them like the plague. So that's wonderful. But before we jump into that, give us a little bit of background of yourself and what has been your path on this entrepreneurial journey.
Well, thank you. Yes, I started my first entrepreneurial business when I was in law school. I had been driving truck to put my way through school, and I purchased several trucks and ran them while I was going to school, which in retrospect seems like kind of a foolish thing to have done. Why not just focus on law school? But hey, I was young and energetic. After coming out of law school, I went into corporate life for a few years, but being an entrepreneur at heart, I wound up going into real estate development for a number of years. Started out with Trammell Crow Company, a really premier commercial developer out of Dallas, Texas. Then I did my own thing for a number of years, and then migrated into healthcare, created a healthcare company where we grew it to 12 locations in 4 states, had about 800 employees and 800 residents, which was pretty daunting. And after doing that for a number of years, decided it was time for my junior partners to take the mantle. But I wasn't ready to hang it up, and so I decided that I would become a business coach and help other emerging businesses and lawyers really benefit from my years of experience, both practicing law and creating and operating businesses.
Yeah, it kind of gives me the impression of it's like if you just had a bunch of book knowledge and you tried to teach that to people, that's surface level. But you made mistakes and you made successes, and now you're saying, you know what? Let me come alongside you and guide you along the way and point out this little, pothole and this little hurdle and this little speed bump, and we'll navigate through here, and I'll show you some of the tips and tricks. And so that's a wonderful perspective to be on, as opposed to just buy my thing.
Well, it's interesting that you should talk about potholes, because I was explaining to one of my young sons several months ago that having run the track several times, if I tell my son that there is a man-sized hole on the inside left curve up on the north end of the track, that's not necessarily brilliance on my part. That just means I've run the track several times, and I probably fell in that hole, and I would just as soon he didn't.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you use that kind of example, and sometimes people are, I forget the exact example. I'm sure I'll butcher it, but it'll make the point. The guy fictitiously goes to the doctor and goes, "Well, doc, every time I walk down the street, I always break my leg." And he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, I keep falling into this hole." And he goes, "Well, what's the solution?" Go down another street. So it's like you still, and here's the takeaway, the business takeaway. You still need to have the knowledge. So you as the guide are providing the knowledge to people you're working with where these potholes are. But then that's only knowledge. So knowledge is potential power. That person you're mentoring or guiding, the attorneys and the lawyers you work with, they need to be willing to notice it, recognize it, and then adjust in their own practice and law firm. So I think that's a big thing, not to just kind of take it under advisement and have that head knowledge. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, well, knowledge is only effective if you embrace it and actually do something with it. We are all guilty of that, oftentimes ignoring information, ideas, concepts that could really help us, which reminds me, frankly, of a cartoon I saw years ago. You may have seen it as well. It's obviously a pitched battle in the heat of medieval times, and there's this king standing inside his his castle, and there are soldiers up on the roof dumping oil over the side, and there are other soldiers from the opposing side climbing ladders trying to get into the castle. And there's this very quiet-looking, composed sales type who's standing outside with a Gatling gun. He's there on a sales call. And the king's assistant comes up to him and says, there's someone here who wants to sell you something. And the king says, can't he see I'm in a pitched battle for my life? And obviously the message is, oftentimes the answer to our problems is just outside the door.
Yeah.
But we've got to be willing to open the door and accept them in.
Because that Gatling gun would have just annihilated their competition, and he didn't even take half a second to notice that. Because
Exactly.
they were in the throes of what, and here's the other. Let's dive in deep. Wait, you ought to do a whole long discourse on that one cartoon. Find it and do like a whole teaching on that, because the old saying, well, we do it this way because we've always done it this way. Tradition. Well, guess what? The way you've always done it might not be the way that will take you to the levels you want to go. And of course, as we know, that's the definition of insanity. And if, like in your book, I know we want to jump into this, but if a lawyer wants to build a thriving firm, maybe they need to let go of some of the ways or approaches or strategies that they've been doing, not all of them, but at least be open to noticing that maybe what they've been doing to get them to this point maybe needs to be optimized and enhanced to get them to the next point.
Well, that's absolutely true, Mike. And what's really interesting, and you'll find this fascinating, I know I certainly did, only 14% of law schools, only 14% teach young attorneys anything about managing a law firm. And I really think that that's malpractice. I mean, that's, to my way of thinking, it's much like not teaching a medical doctor that they need to wash their hands before they go into surgery. It's like, what could be more fundamental if you're going to be a successful attorney than knowing how to operate a firm? And I think the underlying assumption has been in law schools, and still is, that most attorneys are going to come out and go to work for big law who already have their structures and policies and procedures in place. That said, virtually 50% of all graduate attorneys go into private practice in a small firm or medium-sized firm at some point during their career. And I will tell you, not to sound like a smart aleck, but the truth is attorneys in general are really buttoned down. They're very organized. They're really good at their craft. But when it comes to actually knowing and understanding how the business side of a law firm operates, that is something that many of them are really uncomfortable with and frankly not knowledgeable about.
Yeah. Well, I think that you're right. It's almost like the institution of law propagates upon itself to create drones and clones because they don't feel like, let's have, here's a challenge to law schools out there. Let's have a law school that comes out and says, we are an entrepreneurial focused law school. You're going to come through learning the law. Check. Yes, of course. But we're going to teach you how to build and thrive and grow and make an impact in your community. And maybe that could be a huge competitive advantage for attorneys coming in. So with that thought in mind, let's shift over into your book, 5 Mistakes Lawyers Make That Kill the Career, because I'm sure one of them has to be the fact that you have to be watching for opportunities to build and grow in business development.
Well, it really starts out, and this, of course, applies to all of us, whether we're practicing law or not, is just really good time management. And most people hearing me say that would probably go, duh. Yeah. But in reality, an attorney is very susceptible to really poor time management. And it's because they're being pulled between what they feel are a whole series of competing high priorities. And as a result, unless and until they get a handle on their phone and on their text messages and on the email management and have a policy or procedure in place to help prevent colleagues from constantly interrupting them, their time management becomes an absolute shambles. And so that's the competition, if you will, of wanting to get the work done on the one hand, and at the same time wanting to be accommodating and responsive to colleagues and to clients. And so what I have recommended, and I feel really strongly about it, and because I know it's not only necessary, but it actually works, is you have to start from the premise that you're going to organize your day and that you're going to be available, but you're not going to be constantly available. That if your clients and your colleagues know and understand that they're not going to be waiting for days or weeks for you to get back to them, but they can't simply walk into your office and interrupt you anytime, every time. So there's really 4 things that you need to get under control. First of all, I recommend strongly that when you start your day, that you not only prioritize the top 3 things that you're going to get done, but that you take the one that is the most difficult and make it the first that you tackle. Number 2, you shut off your phone. You simply don't allow yourself to be constantly looking at text messages and incoming emails. You ask your associate, your assistant, to field as many of the emails as they possibly can, and that you will come out of your office at least twice a day to look at the emails that you absolutely need to respond to, that you don't take unscheduled phone calls, and that you don't enter into unscheduled meetings. Now that sounds easier. I mean, that sounds pretty comprehensive, and it is, but it can be done, and it will make a magical difference in a person's productivity to the tune of at least 2 to 3 hours a day.
Well, I will agree with you with that, and I've subscribed to that mindset for a couple decades in my career, and I will tell you there's 2 things that I will say on that point, and we could probably end it right here, and people would go, huge takeaways on this interview. But number 1, there's the mindset of what you just said, productivity and efficiency and all that. But there's something else that I will propose to you that accomplishes, which is this. Do you think that, did you see the news recently where Richard Branson went to space?
Yes.
Okay, so Richard Branson is a pretty big deal, billionaire. We know his reputation. Do you think that you or I could pick up the phone and just call him up and he'd just pick up and chit chat?
Highly unlikely.
Right. So people in positions of power are maybe accessible when you know the correct combination or key to, but you can't just get them. Well, if you are an attorney, lawyer, and you are projecting yourself to be, well positioned, and you're, you don't want to, be obscure, but you cannot be accessible like that. So if that's the case, and since that's the case, then you must be, maybe have on your website or have your assistant that says, oh yeah, would love to connect you up with Mark for that free consultation. I'm going to send you that link, and here's our free consultation link. You can select the time that works best for you. And it's going to be, when they click on it, it's going to be something later in the week or the following week. That does have that mental positioning of, all right, that's the way things are done. And then secondly, I would just say, how do you do that? Well, the tool. You can't just go, how does Wednesday at 4? Nope, that doesn't work for me. You need to have a tool, and there's many out there, so just find one. It doesn't matter what you use, because the best one out there is the one you're going to actually use. But Time Trade, Calendly, Schedule Once, all these different ones. Find one that you use, but then you just have this simple link that says, hey, love to schedule up that call. Here's a link to see what would work best for you. And then when they schedule it, it goes on your calendar and there's a reminder. So I think that's a huge piece. But talk a little bit about the aspect of when you do that. Yes, it's time efficiency savings, but it also positions you better to your target audience.
Well, everything that you said, Mike, is absolutely true, and I think that that very few attorneys would intellectually disagree with that. I think the bigger challenge comes when now a person is actually a client, and or you have struggles with your colleagues. It's really the bigger interruptions that I think most attorneys experience are clients who are already, well, in fact, what they would call really good clients. They've got a struggle, they've got a problem, they've got an issue going on, And it's human nature for an attorney to want to be accessible and responsive. But the reality is, if you are constantly available and constantly responsive, you are defeating yourself, because in the course of an 8, 10, 12-hour day, you've probably lost a minimum of a couple of hours easily by continually breaking up the flow and the rhythm of your day. But even more so than clients, which are reasonably manageable, is the internal issues you have within a law firm, where unless you have a polite but firm policy on please don't interrupt me when the door to my office is closed, or some other form of indication, some other signal if you're out in an open office, that you are in deep thought and you really don't want to be disturbed, it's really the frequent interruptions of other colleagues that most attorneys find to be most problematic.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what's another
one?
Well,
and I could be guilty of that too. You know, I mean, if you were in the office next to me, I could get up and walk in and say, "Hey, Mike, I got a question." Well, gosh, I just blew your $1 million thought. And the reality is, and several studies show this, that after I then waddle back out of your office, it's going to take you somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes
to get back
mentally back to where you were.
Yeah. Yeah, I can. That's kind of like the old multitasking argument. It's like, you can say, oh, I did this, and then at the same time did that. You can do that, but are you fully there and present and focused and as efficient as you should be and could be? Probably not.
I just recently saw a quote that I'll probably slaughter this, but it goes something like this. Multitasking is the opportunity to do several things poorly all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I really believe that to be true. I mean, I like to delude myself into thinking that I can do several things at once, but here would be a quick example. If you're attending a webinar, but you're also scanning your phone, chances are pretty good at the end of the webinar you have retained very little. You were, quote, present, but you really weren't present.
Yeah, and you know what? Here's something else. Let's go deeper on that one statement right there, because I do believe that that's a very valid statement. So what can be done about it? So here's a thought. Let's say that there's a lawyer going, well, but there's some online things that I do want to attend to learn from, whatever the topic might be. But I do like to kind of have it running in the background and put my headphones in and listen. But okay, Mark, you got me here on this efficiency thing. Well, here would be one potential solution. So you put that audio on, let's say it's a YouTube video or a video, wherever you're getting it, and then you do one of those speed up options. And I know it sounds crazy to say this, but I've seen reports and research on the fact that we can hear at many, many, many times the level that someone can talk. So I can hear and comprehend you talking at probably 3 to 4 times how fast you can speak. And I've done this for years. I've done the speed up thing, and I've listened to it. It almost borders on sounding like chipmunk. But you do it at the speed at what you prefer. It doesn't need to be 2 or 3x. It could be 1.5 times. But the point is, I find myself focusing even more on the content because I don't want to miss it, because I know it's going fast. And then you look up and it's like, oh, that hour-long webinar was done in 38 minutes. Cool. I saved myself some time. Now I can get back to the other task. And I was way more focused in on it, and I got more out of it. Have you ever done that?
You know, I have, and I agree with it. I never thought, but I think your point is a really good one, that in the process of going faster, you not only are saving time, but you are, in fact, focusing more intentionally. And I believe that's the word that is really important for any of us when we're present. Are we being intentional, and are we being focused, or are we just in the room, so to speak? And so when you're speeding up the audio, you have to make a mental recognition that, yes, I need to be really intentional here because it's going at a pretty fast clip.
And I would challenge you and listeners to try that, because most videos these days have that feature. You look at the little gear, setting gear, and most of them will have the thing to, playback speed. And you will find yourself going, okay, it's almost like you think subconsciously, I'm forcing myself not to multitask, but I do know I've got all these other things to do, but I'm going to try this here, and I'm going to listen to this teaching, training, instructional thing, whatever it is, because it is relevant and I want to learn from it. But if I speed this up, you're going to find yourself going, okay, I'm going to take a pause in my day to get this done and get quickly back to my next task, because I know I've got a lot to do. But now you're going to find yourself really honed in on listening to that, because it is going a little bit faster, and you don't, and it is actually, in marketing and psychology, it's called a pattern interrupt. Because if I all of a sudden stood up, in a meeting on my desk, and it's kind of like maybe way back in the day, what was the Robin Williams movie, Captain, My Captain, Dead Poet Society, that kind of thing got the guy's attention, and it was a pattern interrupt. And in reality, that speed up could be a pattern interrupt and a time saver and a focus. So maybe that becomes, one of the takeaways here. I think that just even talking with you so far here, we could probably spend another 7.5 hours on the rest of the 5 mistakes lawyers make to kill the career. But, let's pause right here on this one and say, you know what, we've got some great takeaways that we just laid out. Mark, what is the best way that someone could learn the rest of the 5 mistakes and learn more about yourself, but even download a copy of your book?
Well, thank you for that. I would say that anyone who's interested can get a free copy of the book by going to CoachRockwell.com, CoachRockwell.com. And they'll be able to download a free PDF of the book, which is probably take about 15, 20 minutes to read. And I can assure you that it has the potential of making a profound difference in the way they manage their time and their career.
Wonderful. Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a real pleasure getting to know you.
Well, likewise. Thanks ever so much, Mike. It's been enjoyable.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.